Before I start on the new session, I just want to tell you that if in between you hear a ringing tone and are alarmed by it, it's meant to be an alarm bell. It's a signal for us to wind up and stick to the schedule. So that's also to let you know why we'll suddenly be rung off the stage. When we were trying to make combinations of speakers in this large jigsaw puzzle that we have generated of 66 odd speakers, we thought of putting Hassan Elahi and Sherbano Taseer together because in many ways they're two faces of what has been the dominant strand of this last decade. The generation of terror, the exporting of terror, and the combating of terror. In a sense, they're two faces of that terror project. One, of course, is much more obviously violent, fundamentalist, restrictive of freedoms. It's the kind of terror that Sherbano has been victim to. She's the daughter of Governor Taseer, Salman Taseer, who was assassinated earlier this year for standing up and speaking against the blasphemy law in Pakistan. Subsequently, her brother has been kidnapped, and Sherbano has been speaking very, very courageously against the blasphemy law and the removal or dilution of the blasphemy law in Pakistan. She recently won a big and prestigious human rights award for speaking out. She's also impacted the UN Human Rights Council, and there was a sort of definition that you can't defame religions, but Sherbano has been instrumental in the UN saying that we must protect the freedom of individuals rather than the freedom of religions. Hassan Elahi is a fascinating story in himself. He was a professor at Maryland University when in 2002 the FBI picked him up, put him through a search. They had information, like most intelligence agencies, the wrong information that Hassan had put bombs somewhere and was on the run. He was let off very quickly, but he realized that given his name and how much he travels, he's going to be on the terror list always. And so he decided to turn himself into a sort of Truman Show. He has a website called Tracking Transients, where he puts up minute by minute what he's doing during the day. He floods the FBI with that information. And in a way, it's a sort of mockery of this desire for surveillance, the kind of people and societies we have become. And, between the two of them, not only are they both courageously and creatively combating terrorism in their own ways, but are really confronting prejudice in its most constricting manner. There are two very interesting strands because we have a short time that I'm going to try and explore in our session. One is this idea of surveillance, which is becoming more and more accepted in our time as we begin to value security more than freedom. And that's a discussion that we're going to have with Hassan. And with Sherbano, the idea of crossing a line of fear in the head, when you know that you're up against something that may take away your life, what drives you to still do it? What hope is there for societies where fundamentalism has become the major tenor rather than the fringe tenor that it is in most societies? Before we begin this conversation, I'm going to ask Sherbano to very quickly tell us her story and why she decided to resist even after she'd lost her father.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone can hear me. I suppose my story really begins in November of last year when an illiterate and poor Christian woman named Asya Noreen was sentenced to death for allegedly insulting Islam under Pakistan's draconian and unforgiving blasphemy laws. These laws, they're criminally vague and open-ended, and they're most often used as an instrument of repression and terror. And they promote this McCarthy-esque witch hunt atmosphere where anyone can level any kind of accusation at anyone, and the person who's accused has to spend the rest of his or her life in prison because of the mandatory life imprisonment clause. So my father, Salman Taseer, was the governor of Punjab at the time that this incident took place, and he went to visit this woman in jail and took with him a mercy petition seeking pardon from our President Asif Ali Zardari. He held a press conference and he gave many interviews in which he maintained that Pakistan's blasphemy laws they're being misused far too frequently and that they required an amendment to prevent this from happening. he reminded the public that Pakistan's flag is green and white, and the white is there to represent the minorities, but every day these minorities are being terrorized and threatened and marginalized. So soon after he made these comments, the religious right flared up. They lack legitimacy because they've never managed to get more than 10% of the popular vote, but they have a disproportionate amount of street power. They're loud, they're well armed, they're well funded, and they're lusting for power. So they protested and they burnt my father in effigy, and they issued religious edicts against him. But their biggest crime was that they made something that was about humanity into something about religion. They twisted my father's views to suit their own incendiary narrative. My father had stood up for a voiceless and forgotten woman who had been languishing in jail, and for this he was declared a blasphemer and marked for violence. And then on January 4th of this year, on my brother Shariar's 25th birthday, a member of my father's security team, Mumtaz Qadri, casually strolled up behind him and shot my father 27 times until he died. In the days that followed the murder, my family and I were left reeling. No cleric after cleric refused to lead my father's funeral prayer. The Urdu media churned out editorials and TV shows glorifying my father's murderer and claiming that my father, the blasphemer, had deserved what he got. At Qadri's first court appearance, he was showered with rose petals by hundreds of lawyers. And a rally of 30,000 rabid clerics took to the streets in Karachi to support the murder. It's a pretty open and shut case. We had a confession, weapons, forensics, eyewitnesses, but it took us 3 months to find a lawyer and a prosecutor who would be willing to take the case. And Qadri, on the other hand, was offered pro bono services by the head of the Rawalpindi Bar Association. Now that Qadri has been sentenced to death by the anti-terrorism courts for what he did, the former Chief Justice of the Lahore High Court has thrown his weight behind him and is taking up his appeals case because he couldn't bear the burden on his conscience. I guess you all should know that this man, this beacon of enlightened thinking, is also the same man who banned Facebook and Twitter and Google last year, and he has a very special relationship with Hafiz Saeed of the militant Jamaat-ul-Dawa group. So I guess the aftermath of my father's murder, it brought a rather frightening reality home, which was that it wasn't just a man or an organization that we were dealing with, it was an entire mindset, and it was an entire environment. And this kind of poisonous mindset and environment is created and allowed to flourish when you have an Islamic constitution that is in this archaic business of legislating morality. And you know, when puny dwarfs are allowed to become giants under this righteous cloak of religion. But really, it happens when people allow it to happen, where they collude with it through apathy or through fear, and an emotion that I firmly believe is conquerable. One of my father's last tweets was, "I was under huge pressure to cower down before righteous pressure on the blasphemy law, and I refused, even if I'm the last man standing." So when a man like that is murdered, you find yourself wondering what else disappeared into the grave with him, and whether his death was the last nail in the coffin for a progressive and pluralistic Pakistan, and if there was even any space left for debate or criticism or any kind of dissent. A few days after his assassination, I gave an interview to NDTV in which I criticized his blasphemy laws and religious extremism in Pakistan. And the last question that Barkha Dutt asked me was if I was afraid. And I replied that I refuse to live in fear. And because if I'm fearful, then that's giving these extremists and these terrorists what they want. And I didn't intend on making their job any easier. The same night, the militant and Islamist Sunni Tehreek group, they began to threaten me, saying she should remember the fate of her father before making any statements. Our home and offices began to be flooded with letters and packages and phone calls on an almost daily basis, warning us of dire consequences if we didn't back down from this issue. I've seen firsthand just how fragile life is, and what one lunatic so deluded in his warped piety, what he's capable of. But their warnings and their threats, they somehow had a reverse effect on me. I was disgusted to my core, and I became even more resolute and more determined that these monsters should never win. And I began to do whatever I could. I began to appear on television, write op-eds, give talks at local think tanks, local and international think tanks and universities, trying to highlight the issues and the reality behind these laws. And I guess trying to change the mindset. People in the audience would always tell me that I was next. Sometimes people would come up to me and tell me that they were happy about what happened to my father, and they hoped that the same thing would happen to me. In London, a woman had slipped me a note saying, after a talk, saying that she was worried for my safety and that I should just give it up and stay silent. But I guess I saw a very clear choice. I could do what she says, which is I could stay quiet, or I could speak up and counter their ideology. I could watch more families and more countries suffer through what mine had to, or I could help people who thought like me, people who are liberal, people who are progressive, people who want peace. I could help them reclaim their space. Because I felt like if I didn't stand up, then people who thought like me wouldn't be able to stand up tomorrow. And worst of all, my father's death would have been in vain. Change is something that doesn't just happen. It's forged. And sometimes, and unfortunately, it's often at great personal risk. But if you allow fear to consume you, then you're playing into these people's hands. And so I think we need to keep living, keep fighting, keep speaking up, keep acting out against injustice, against extremism, and especially when it isn't easy to do so. And I think as long as we can keep doing that, then we'll always win. Thank you.
Sherbano hates people sharing this fact about her, but she's a journalist with Newsweek and Daily Beast, and she should value facts. So I'd like to add that Sherbano is just 22 years old, and so it's particularly commendable that she's standing up the way she is. Hassan, please share with our audience the story of why America can generate as much fear in some senses as the Taliban can.
Sure,
and
sure.
why you became the Truman Show.
Okay, well, let me, can you folks hear me over there? Let me go over here. I'm gonna just give a quick second. We're gonna get, and hopefully this plug won't come out. Oh, okay, the microphones were a little different when we did this earlier today. All right, so, sorry, this is fine. I'll work around it. Thank you, thank you, Shama. And really, it's quite humbling to be here, and thank you so much for all coming out. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing, at least the last few years. And it started right over here. This is the Detroit airport that you can see. And I'm an artist, so I do exhibitions here and there and all over the place. And I was flying back from an exhibition on June 19th of 2002. And as I'm coming back in, I hand my passport over, just as you would do as any immigration control. And the guy that swipes the passport through just completely just froze, and it was something just out of a movie. Just completely, he wouldn't even look up at me, wouldn't even say anything. And it felt like an eternity, but a few moments later, he said, "Follow me, please," walked me through a rat maze at the airport, and I ended up in an INS detention facility, which is actually quite unusual for US citizens to be taken in by INS, because, well, usually there's no overlap between the two. So I'm in this huge room, and the room is almost the size of this room over here, and probably almost as crowded, maybe not as dense. But you see all these people, and you see everyone from probably every part of the world, and they're all, you can just see that something is not right, and that this is the first day in the US. And of course, I'm trying to sit there, I get these crazy red dreads coming out of my hair, I'm smelling really bad because I've been on the flights for like 5 days, coming through a really wacky, convoluted route. And I'm trying to start the conversation with the security guard there, actually, well, one of the INS agents. And I said, you guys got any idea what I'm doing here? And those guys were just as confused as I was, because and I have a US passport in my hand, and I wasn't waiting for an interpreter, so it was something just bizarre. And just literally a few moments later, this man in a dark suit walks up straight up to me. And you have to remember, everyone's in uniform here that works there, except this one guy in this dark suit. And he looks at me and says, "I expected you to be older." I'm going, "Okay, I tried to age as quick as I could, but you mind explaining what's going on here?" Because I still don't know what's happening, and I'm in this huge room. He says, "Well, you got some explaining to do yourself." He takes me around a corner, and we end up in an interrogation room. And then he asked me, "Well, where were you? Where are you coming from? Who pays for your trips? Why do you go to all these places?" And then, I kid you not, like literally out of nowhere, he asks me, "Where were you September 12th? And when most of us are asked a random date of any date, most of us can't remember what that date was, what we did. Where were you May 19th? It's as random as that. So it's like, okay, I don't know, but I can tell you, I can look it up. So we pulled out my POM, my PDA, and this is what we pulled up. So you can see that on September 12th, between 10 and 10:30, I paid my storage bill. From 10:30 to 12, I met with Judith, who was one of my graduate students at the time. 12 to 3, I taught my intro class. 3 to 6, I taught my advanced class. Where were you the 11th? Where were you the 19th? Where were you the 23rd? We read about 6 months of my appointments, going back and forth, every little detail. And it's like, and he'd ask me, "Okay, how about October 15th? Okay, let's go to October 15th. This is what it was. How about this date?" And really, it was just a good thing I actually had all those details, because if I didn't, I could only imagine how bad this could have been. But then he explained to me, he goes, "The storage unit that you paid this rent on the 12th." He goes, "What do you have in it?" It's like, well, winter clothes. By the way, this was in Tampa, Florida, so it's hot there all year round. You don't really need winter clothes. So I had winter clothes there. I had furniture that I couldn't fit in my apartment. I had just, usual, just junk, just kind of crap. And he looked really, really, really confused and said, "No explosives." So it turns out that that they had received a report that an Arab man had fled on September 12th who was hoarding explosives. Now, it wasn't a case of mistaken identity. It was not a case of similar names. It was, that's the guy. Now, you have to remember, I'm not Arab, but we're operating like all those guys over there. They're all the same anyway. And if you have a Muslim name, then you must be Arab, and if you're Arab, then you must have explosives. That's the logic that we're operating on. Now, I understand that on an individual basis, we're going to have ignorant people on these things. That's just going to happen. You can't get away from that. But when a country, particularly your own country, decides to take this ignorance on as the basis for national policy, we got some serious problems. And so basically, but I think anyone that talks to me for more than a couple of minutes realizes I'm no threat. This is obviously a mistake of some kind. So he says to me, "Well, I have enough information here. I'm going to pass this on to the Tampa office. They'll follow up with you, and we'll take care of it." I was like, "Great." So I spent the next 6 months in this building. This is the FBI offices in Tampa, Florida. Until recently, you actually couldn't take pictures of federal buildings. So I actually had to have Google do it for me. But even though the law's passed, I'm not going out in front of this building with a camera. And I don't recommend any of that for any of those brown folks doing that. So anyway, I spent 6 months going back and forth. They did let me go home. They trusted me enough. But it was, after 9 consecutive polygraphs that they finally said, "Okay, everything's great." Questions like, well, first they ask you, like, is your name Hassan? Is today Tuesday? Are we in Florida? And then they ask you, do you belong to any groups that wish to harm the United States? Problem is, I work at a university. So some of my colleagues, I think you might want to ask some of them directly. But so at the end of all this, they said, "Hey, everything's great." I was like, "I know everything's great. Everything's fine. That's what I've been trying to tell you all along. So why don't you guys give me a letter saying that everything's okay? Because all we need is the last guy at the last airport not to get the last memo, and here we go all over again." So they said, "Okay, we can't do that." Well, of course, because in order to be formally cleared, you have to be formally charged. And because this was all extrajudicial, the law, that's just a little inconvenience that just gets in the way of these terrorism investigations. So they said, "Here's some phone numbers. If you get into trouble, call us. We'll take care of it." I was like, "Great." So ever since then, I created this little thing. So I'd call my FBI agent, and then then the phone calls became emails. Emails got longer and longer and longer. Then back in 2003, I created this little software that tracks me at any given moment. This is way before the days of Facebook, way before the days of Foursquare or Looped or Google Latitude. I mean, you can kind of recognize the top image, right? And then let's go in a little bit. So let's go in, and then you can see that we're kind of in a there's a little bit of water down there, and this little flashing pixel is actually me. So you can follow me around at any given moment, and you can zoom out all the way out. There's a ton of data in here. There's all sorts of information, so you can see all the flights that I've ever been on. And this really goes to since birth, you know, because I've decided to create a little parallel file. You can see all the meals that I've been eating, so you can see that on June 11th, I had this plate of ass donor kebab in Paris. You know, I mean, there's other stuff like you can see where I'm doing my business, because the FBI really needs to know where I'm doing my business. Such as this, because you know it's important. I mean, I'm a very sharing guy. I'm all about compliance here. If anything, you know, a little aggressively compliant. So this was a sign that I saw in Mombasa International Airport. There's a lot of these. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So the interesting thing is, you know, in a surveillance state, I mean, a lot of, you know, I'm basically watching who watches me, and these are some of the folks that come by to visit every now and then, and. I made a nice little list for you so you can clean them up. The problem is I don't know why they show up, but they show up. But I recently moved to Washington because I have a lot of fans, you can see, because a lot of these guys are over there. So I just wanted to be closer to these guys. And so anyway, so just a little bit of that stuff. And I'm going to let this run for a little bit. And so thank you very much. And I'm going to sit down and we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation.
So, Hassan, I'm going to start with you,
Sure.
you know, which is, you just so funnily and eloquently described the prejudice that underwrites this whole anti-terror project, you know, and also the kind of, the way it's a monochromatic approach, you know, societies, entire communities, entire religions are turned into a monolithic sort of entity, you know. You know, the Islamist fundamentalists do that, America does that, and as you said in your own society, for instance, in India, we were dangerously on that journey where every Muslim is not a terrorist, but every terrorist is a Muslim.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, in doing this surveillance of yourself, Hassan, what really do you feel about this whole security era? Yeah. In India, very many, particularly the middle class, the well-heeled, are beginning to believe that it's better to have the Israeli approach to security rather than be liberal, free, democratic societies.
Yeah, and you know, this is one of the things that I think it's very problematic in a sense, because you want both, but yet do you really want to go through the full process of both? And that gets to be really complicated. So in my case, I decided that instead of fearing this, instead of fearing the system, instead of fearing this apparatus, why not embrace this? And even during the investigation itself, one of the things that, you know, when you're literally sitting face to face with a person that decides life or death, I mean, if they didn't believe me, they could have said, you know what, we're taking to Guantanamo and we don't have to tell you what, hell, they don't even have to tell me where they're taking me. And you could just be disappeared. And that has happened to many people. So I decided that, you know, well, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Which I'm sure was, I mean, I don't know what was going through the FBI agent's head at that time, but I can't imagine that being the normal response for most people. I'm sure most people that are absolutely innocent that's accused of something of that, how dare you accuse me, I'm innocent. But my response was, well, you know, look, I know you guys have a job to do, I got a job to do, let's get this cleared up, let's not let's not aggravate the situation more than we need to, let's try to diffuse this. And I think the cooperation is really what kind of saved me from getting shipped off. You know, the irony of this is that I only know of one other person that's been, I've only met, I should say, in person, one other person that's been taken in to the FBI on terrorism-related charges and has been released. So either it's, and that's Steve Kurtz, who's also another artist and a professor. So ironically, it's either just the two of us that's been taken in, or there's a lot of people that either aren't talking or can't talk. And I think, and it's no coincidence that Steve and I are both artists. I think artists have a different level of agency, and we react to things differently than say, you know, say the random New York City cab driver that gets pulled in for something. I mean, there's a level of agency that we have that we're able to look at things in a different way. And I think when you're trained in that way of being counterintuitive, when you're trained in that way of try to creatively problem solve, you come up with different ways of reacting to situations.
Sherbanu, he took the route of mockery and compliance and cooperation. You know, when you are fighting the kind of fundamentalist strands that there are in Pakistan, do you believe the kind of revolutions that have been sweeping across the Middle East, is that something that can come to Pakistan? Is that something you'd welcome? I was reading somewhere that you said you fear revolution coming to Pakistan and you prefer evolution, you know. So can you pinpoint what would be, apart from individually speaking up, what do you think is the way that Pakistan can get back its liberal mojo?
Well, I think the nature of the revolutions that just took place in the Middle East is also different. I mean, we are a democracy. Our people do have rights. I mean, yeah, certainly I don't wish for a revolution to come to Pakistan. I think revolutions they're bloody and they're violent, and I don't see any Napoleon, you know, coming in to clean up the mess. Like I don't believe in violent overhaul. I think evolution of institutions and I believe in the process. So I think that's always more important.
Well, I mean, particularly in Pakistan right now, the news is not good, you know, and there are so many aspects of it that is in trouble. In your own fight against the blasphemy law, but also this strain in the society, what would you figure is the first place to zero in on, you know? Because there's also, your political system is feudal, there's a kind of inheritance to it rather than really democratic values. The army is a problem, you know, you have your intelligence agencies, and then you have all the fringe and, you know, the fundamentalist groups. So what do you feel really for Pakistan to turn around? What is the one area that you and people like you would focus on?
Something that I feel very strongly about. During my father's murder investigation, we were shown this video in which in a tiny mosque in Rawalpindi, there was this rabid cleric, you know, he was just kind of screeching into the microphone calling for the murder of my father and for Asif Ali Zardari and for Shahir Rahman, another parliamentarian who had taken a similar stance on the blasphemy law. And you know, just brainwashing this group of about 30 men who were so enthralled with what this cleric was saying. They were just kind of swaying in awe. And this video was taken with a mobile phone, and you could see Qadri, my father's assassin, in the corner nodding his head. And you know, this was on December 31st. So 4 days later, he went and he shot my father. So I think that, I mean, that was something that kind of, I guess it displayed a very ugly reality, which is that a lot of what goes on in these mosques and in these madrasas, you know, you have these clerics who are so powerful, they just, and they're brainwashing an entire generation of children to believe in this very radical and sometimes militant Islam. And if you go into some of these madrasas, you know, you'll have 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds who don't really know much about math or science, or they can't speak English, or and there's no concept even of critical thinking. But they'll know how to strap on a vest and blow themselves up, and they'll know how to fire a gun. And these clerics, I think they have everybody by the jugular. And so this is something that needs to really be paid attention to. First of all, the mushrooming of all these madrasas, and second of all, the funding you know, how these madrasas, which are most often illegal, how they're thriving. And a lot of this funding is coming in from Saudi Arabia. I think there was a WikiLeaks document a couple of months ago that said that $100 million a year makes its way from Saudi and UAE charities into these madrasas, and they're funding this very Wahhabi, militant, hardline Islam. So this is something that I think it's not talked about ever. It needs to, the world needs to focus their attention on this.
You know, there's this altarface that I described, which is the American end of the terror project, you know. America's relationship with Saudi Arabia, its very troubled relationship with Pakistan, and over the last decade under Bush, the kind of demonization of Muslim communities rather than the fringe elements or the fundamentalist elements in Islam has played a huge role in the escalation of all this, you know, or in it moving center stage rather than being on the periphery. So would you believe also that one of the things that has added to this mess is America's own approach to it and America's relationship with Pakistan?
Of course, I think that America's approach, I mean, I do believe in having a no-holds-barred policy towards these guys. But I think the way that they did it, they went blustering into a country that they had no idea, you know, they didn't know anything about Afghanistan, how to fight there, what the nature of the beast really was. And they've had this 10-year war that has done what? How do you measure the progress? How do you, I mean, they go into countries, they drone America, they drone Pakistan, they drone Afghanistan, and it just, I mean, yes, I guess it shows a no-holds-barred policy, but you're not getting to the root of the problem, which is extremism. That's something that you're not, that they're not addressing. And I mean, I just don't know how this war is going to end. And it's had such a devastating impact on our region. I think it's actually had to create more terrorists than anything else.
Asin, you know, as I was saying that there is now a great acceptance of surveillance. All of us journalists in India, when we talk, you hear a beep and, you know, you imagine that you're being listened to. Strangely, there's a very, very liberal lawyer who stands up for human rights, Prashant Bhushan. He's been at the forefront of the Anna Hazare movement. And he startled me one day when he said, you know, if we've done nothing wrong, then in the interest of transparency, I don't mind being under surveillance, you know. Can you, you know, even with your project, I don't actually know where you stand on the issue of surveillance, you know.
Well, I think we usually look at it only from one direction, and I think that's a little problematic. And I think we should look at it the fact that we all have the ability to conduct that same surveillance, and it's not just an entity that's outside of us. That we tend to think that the cameras are pointed at us, but we all have cameras with us. I mean, good luck trying to buy a phone these days that doesn't have a camera with it. So, and I think this is, and we were talking about the mobile phone video at the madrasa, and I think it really makes that point even more pertinent that these cameras are everywhere, and we actually could use these for other reasons. I mean, take a look at what happened in Cairo, or take a look at in Egypt, and I'm sorry, in well, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya. I mean, these are perfect examples of what this tiny little device has really changed, and the way to actually to see these images. Until very recently, it was very common for the authorities to confiscate your camera. Well, let them confiscate it because that photo is already on Flickr. And then there's another camera taking a picture of the camera being taken away. So it's not really a matter of Big Brother, it's really the little brother and the millions of little brothers that are there. So we can counter this. It's not, we don't have to fear this. And it's not that we have to treat it that surveillance is one dimension. We could also have the inverse of that, which would be surveillance from underneath. And we all can do this.
That's not the final alarm bell, it's just my first alarm bell, you know, but it means that I have to wrap this up quickly. You mentioned this about technology, Hassan. How is it changing us as people? You know, I understand what you're saying, that there is now, and the social media has become a social phenomenon in itself. Revolutions no longer need heroes, you don't need central figures, you just need social media, you know.
Or the access to information, I think more importantly, yeah.
But how is it changing human relations as well? You know, because again, I'm just sticking with the Indian context because we are here in India. Recently, you know, the danger is that you can also take a lot of things out of context because a camera always has a limited vision. You know, as human beings, we have at least a 180-degree viewfinder, you know. And I think the camera is even less. And what I find problematic as a journalist, as a citizen, is that increasingly conversations are becoming very narrow, non-contextualized. You can magnify and, you know, make something hysterical because you've forgotten the context in which it happened. And so as a race, are we moving inevitably to that?
I think there's a problem because of this narrow focus and the fact that because so much of our information It's never deleted. It's archived permanently. So much of our identities are now moving into this online information system. Can you folks hear me over there?
Can you hear him?
Okay, sorry. Okay, no, I think my mic just went out, but I don't think it, okay, there it goes. Okay, sorry about that. So what I was saying is that so much of our information is now archived, and so much of it is information. So much of our identity is our information body. So the fact that now, I think the first thing that almost anyone does is put your name in Google and see what pops up. Now the thing is, you may say, well, I'm not going to participate in that. I'm going to be anonymous, and I'm going to, but that's not possible because someone else will put your information. So in a way of taking this technology and actually generating your own information, it becomes a little bit more of an identity management tool. And I think we're going to need more of that as our identities move into this 21st century model of information, as our identity as information. So I think this is a very pragmatic example. Is so say if anyone that's put the name of a person or a company or something, and the first thing that pops up is something that's not the most flattering thing. You can't delete it. There's no reason to ever delete anything, and Google will never delete anything. But you can bury it. But in order to bury it, you need 20 pages of other information that you need to generate. Now, going back to the generation to the generating information and such, when I first started this project, people thought, this is some wacky art project, and you're crazy. Why would you want to tell everybody every little thing you're doing and so on? And ironically, if you just take Facebook alone right now, that's 800 million people. That's almost the population of India. I mean, it's catching up very, very, very quickly. So the fact that if Facebook was a country, it's the third largest country in the world, that's a pretty substantial number of people. So, and what that group of people can do, well, we've already seen it in North Africa. Things can happen. I mean, it's not an insignificant number of people that once we start mobilizing that sheer numbers of that size.
As I said, I'm going to run out of time. So I guess the last thought that listening to Hassan leaves me with is that it's no longer enough to just be a human being. You have to be an information artist, And Sherbano, again, last thoughts that is there a generation in Pakistan, because news is always, processed through the print page or through the camera, you get only one dimension of it. What are the signs of hope in Pakistan? Is there others like you that are speaking up? We only see one face of Pakistan, at least in India. So if you were to have any hope that things are going to change or change soon, what would that be?
Of course I have hope, and my hope is in the people of Pakistan. I think we're a very resilient nation. We've faced all kinds of calamities and tragedies, and we're here, we're fighting. I think almost any Pakistani that you meet, they're so patriotic, they're borderline jingoist almost. After the Kashmir earthquake, after the floods, the way that our population mobilized, and we managed to produce a bumper crop. The way that we're still living, we're still fighting. There are bombs going off on a daily basis. There's violence, there's assassinations, and yet we're strong people. So I think my hope in my country lies in the people.
Just to push the point a bit more, Sherbano, I think more terrifying than Qadri assassinating your father was the reaction in society. It was the lawyers, it was people on the ground, the garlanding, the cheering, which shows you that it's more than just the isolated event. So once again, is there a small group of people, a small liberal strain in Pakistan, or is it the dominant strain?
Like I said, the aftermath of my father's murder was almost worse than what happened. It showed so much of what is wrong in Pakistan and in many societies. But like I said, these people are not a majority. They're loud, and they grab headlines. People love to. I mean, just right now, when my father's assassin was given the death sentence, I think they had about 1,000 people who protested, and that's, if you think about it, that's not a lot. We're a country of 181 million people, and you had 100 in Pindi, 100 in Lahore, 200 in Karachi, and the headlines in India, the headlines in America were Pakistan rejects the death sentence. So it's, I mean, yeah, certainly they grab headlines and they make the news, but they're not the majority. They're never voted into power. It's the progressive secular parties that are voted in.
You know, we were hoping that every session will leave us with some crystallized thoughts. For me, the biggest one that Sherbano leaves me with is that fear is just a line in the head, and once you cross it, then you're really free, you know. So thank you very much for listening in. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Sherbano.